Okay. Perfect. And I think we'll get started. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our BC cover cropping panel. My name is Emily, and I'm the engagement coordinator with FarmFolk, CityFolk. I recognize a lot of names on the call and a lot of faces. It's really nice to see everyone again, and I'm really excited to be here this evening. I'd like to honor and respectfully recognize that I am on the traditional and unceded land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And the work that FarmFolk CityFolk does takes place on many unceded and sovereign Indigenous territories. And we have guests and participants joining us today from across so-called BC. So I'd encourage you to all recognize in your own way the land that you are on. And this evening, we are going to be talking about a lot of soil building practices, and I just want to be mindful that these aren't new ideas and that Indigenous peoples have been stewarding and farming land in BC for a long time, using a lot of these ecologically mindful practices that we're going to be talking about. And so I just want to start us off today with honoring the land and the people stewarding this land, both ancestors and those who continue to today. So this event is hosted by FarmFolk CityFolk, BC's oldest and largest food and agriculture nonprofit. We work to connect, empower, and inspire people to strengthen BC's food systems, and we do that through a variety of programs, which you can check out on our website. Julia is going to put a link in the chat for us. If you're not familiar with the work that we do, I encourage you to check it out, and feel free to send us a note if you have any questions. This panel tonight is supported by the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund. Funding for the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund has been provided by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada through the Agricultural Climate Solutions On-Farm Climate Action Fund. Julia Zato, our engagement manager, is also here with us. So she's the person popping those links into the chat. If you're having any troubles with Zoom or you have any non-farming related questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, and hopefully Julia can help you out with that. And we are joined today by our three panelists, Les Wilms, Felix Egger, and Matthew Carr. I'm so thrilled to have these three panelists here this evening. I've worked with them all before, and I know that they're going to bring unique perspectives to the conversation, so I'm really excited. And I know that we also have some regional agrologists and some sort of ministry soil specialists and a few other independent soil specialists on the call. So I invite you all to say hi in the chat and let everyone know who you are and where you're coming from. And I think you'll also bring a really awesome perspective to the conversation. So I invite you to be as involved as possible. Just to give you a quick idea of how the evening will work, we're going to be giving our panelists a bit of time to introduce themselves and just give you a little bit of background about their farm and their experience cover cropping. And then we're going to dive into the first round of questions, which are predetermined questions. And we sort of put them together based on a lot of the questions and inquiries that were that you all submitted when you registered for this webinar. So we're gonna ask a few predetermined questions that will be asked by your moderator, which is me. And then next we will answer some audience questions. So definitely be ready with your own questions in the second half of the event. You can add them to the chat if you'd like, and Julia and I will do our best to keep track of them. I do think it would be best to add your questions closer to when we're done sort of the first round of questions, because I have a feeling a lot of content is going to be covered in that first round, and some of your questions might even be answered in that first round. So maybe just try and hold off on firing things into the chat until we're sort of closer to that time in the evening. So yeah, and before I pass it off to our panelists, I just want to give a quick definition of like what we mean when we talk about cover crops, just so that we're sort of like all on the same page heading into this panel. So cover crops broadly can be defined as non-cash crops grown in addition to the primary cash crop, often planted in areas that would otherwise be bare for long or short periods of time. And a cover crop is a plant that is used primarily to improve soil health, slow erosion, enhance water availability, suppress weeds, help control pests and diseases, increase biodiversity. I'm sure there's a million more that we'll talk about tonight, but essentially they bring a variety of benefits to a farm. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we talk about cover crops. So yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to our panelists now to do a quick round of introductions. They're just gonna let us know a little bit about them, where they farm, what they grow, their experience with cover crops. And I'm gonna pass it off to Felix. If you want to introduce yourself.
I can do that. Thank you, Emily. Hi, my name is Felix. I am a viticulturist by trade. So I farm grape vineyards for wine production, much like Carnile. Good to see you, Carnile. I am based in Duncan on Vancouver Island and farm for Unsworth currently. I spent the last few years, 6 years in the interior in the Okanagan and Kelowna, also farming grapes. And that's where I started meddling around with cover crops. And really the last 2 seasons focused a lot on educating myself on the use of no-till cover crops, particularly in vineyard systems, which is a little more complicated than on row crops or anything in the larger scale, just because we have some permanent structures that are made of wood and steel every 8 feet, 7 to 8 feet. And a lot of plants in between that cost a lot of money. So yeah, I'm having fun learning more and more and move to an environment without much water to an environment with almost too much water. So things are going to change quite a bit for my context, and that's great.
Awesome. Thanks. Les, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, sorry. I'm Les Wilms. We farm up in Fort St. John in the Peace River country, and we live on the Treaty 8 territory, traditionally the land of the Denezaw. And we farm in a loamy clay soil. They're actually named Escher and Roseland soils, and so they are a heavy clay. It cannot handle too much water, and so water infiltration is kind of a thing for us, problem for us. And so we're a conventional grain farm. We're a 3,000 acre conventional grain farm where our cash crops are wheat, barley, canola, and oats and peas are also widely grown in our area. We're zero till. We've been zero till or minimum till for the last 15 years. And with that, we've seen a real improvement in our soil structure and organic matter, increase in organic matter and conserving moisture. But we still have a compaction issue. So that's part of what we're trying to alleviate. Emily, at this point, do we share some screens or is that later?
It's totally up to you. We're gonna be diving into like the nitty-gritty details of your cover cropping operation. So whenever it feels like a good time to.
Okay, I'll see if there's time later.
Okay.
Yeah, our main cover crops have been our main cover crops have been we've grown a lot of red clover as a plow down, as a green manure plow down, and also alfalfa, and now we've gotten into some radishes and crimson clovers. So that's been a real help to us.
Awesome. Thanks, Les. I will pass it over to Matt.
Hi guys, my name's Matt. I'm farming out in Cristova, the traditional territories of the Tunaha and Sinixt peoples. Out in the Coonies, we're a diversified mixed organic vegetable farm. We're doing 10 acres on 3 lease sites. We're lucky almost all 3 lease sites have a very sandy loam type soil. So we manage moisture is the hardest thing to keep for us. And so we're looking at how do we improve our organic matter using cover cropping, especially being an organic system. We're pretty blessed that we have livestock on the farm for compost and for that side of the nutritional aspect. But cover cropping going into the future here is definitely a thing, because moving a lot of compost takes a lot of energy and takes a lot of effort. Whereas we can grow cover crops in places where they're not being used for traditional vegetable crops at that current time, and learning how the rotations work with pest management and the soil organic matter. It's been a lot of fun. We've been trialing cover crops. It's really hard in the Kootenay region. We have such a quick spring, like we still have over a foot of snow in our fields. And then all of a sudden it'll be hot, and we'll be growing for that quick short period in the summer. And then the fall, we can get frost as early as the first week of September. And so we've got this very limited window where we're growing vegetables, and how do we offset the cost of growing a cover crop during that period? And then also with the amount of snow, we get close to 6 feet of snow on our farm over the winter. And it can be really hard and challenging to keep an overwintering cover crop such as rye even alive, just because it just has no exposure to sun and it just gets beat up by the snow. We also have a large ruminant population aside from our cattle that also love to get into our fields in the winter and go scavenging for cover crops, especially like tillage radish and things like of that nature. So keeping wildlife out has been a new experiment for us as well. And learning what really excites us with the cover cropping is learning the different rotations and like all the different diversity that we can do in a cover crop. Our main go-to is pretty much rye, and then we're incorporating different legumes and different other crops for different purposes, like breaking up compaction, increasing organic matter, and even just bringing in beneficial pollinators has been a really fun one for us. So over the last couple of years, we've experimented doing projects with UBC, with the soil conservation, with silage versus cover cropping, silage tarps versus cover cropping in organic systems, and looking at nutritional contents and how that impacts the crop after doing a cover crop. And I really like that researchy, nerdy side. I'm just finishing up my articling for the BCIA. And I specialize in horticultural agronomy, where we're dealing with plants and impacting them using human factors, and it's a lot of fun. And I look forward to kind of continuing out that practice. And our farm is just a big playground to me. So
Awesome. I love that. All right. Well, thank you all for the intros. And this is great. I think we're going to dive right into the first round of questions, and we are ahead of schedule, which is even better. So we have more time for questions. I love that. So we're just I'm gonna pose the question, and then I'll have the 3 of you for this first round. I'll have the 3 of you just answer how you see fit, and we can continue in the order that we've been going, or if someone's like really itching to answer right off the bat, I think just feel free to jump in, but we'll give everyone, all 3 of you, a chance to answer. So so the first question that I have for you all is, what are your main goals when implementing a cover crop?
I'll just keep going first. The goals for me, it's something that changes every year, depending on the season and depending on, say, the age of the vineyard that I farm. I look at the vineyard as we have rows every few feet that are vertical and don't do a great job at sequestering carbon or really cycling any of it. And then in between, we have essentially what could be and can be pasture that, I mean, is in our way so to speak, because our main goal is the vines, and especially in organic systems, which is the way I like to farm, keeping moisture out of the canopy and keeping plants out of the canopy, really ensuring airflow through there is something that is important. And so controlling the mid-row growth and making sure that both systems work side by side is something that one of my goals is. I really like to, in viticulture, we have a season from say May until October where we have canopy, and the rest of the season we have nothing. So nothing really happens, and using a winter cover that you see in, depending on where you are, August, September, you can really continue green growth through the winter, especially with brassicas and rye. And here on the island, because it's nicer, not as cold, and not as snowy most of the time, you can actually grow a lot more varieties throughout the winter, and just have constant green growth and constantly feeding your soil until it does get too cold throughout the season. And with something like rye, as soon as it gets above zero again and the soil thaws in spring, it's off to the races and just starts growing, and you don't even have to do anything. It does the job for you as you do other things. Drainage here on the island is a really big thing. We have very clayey soils where I am, and so growing something with beef taproots, mustards, chicory, radishes, and a lot of grains that just soak up a lot of that moisture in spring and turn it into biomass, lets us get out into the field a little sooner without bogging down the tractor, which in seasons like last year, the amount of ruts that are around in fields are insane because it just rained until June, essentially, and people couldn't get out in the field. And you can see it now, the fields that are tilled up, water is ponding, and the fields that are grassed in and the pastures out there, hay fields and whatnot, there's no standing water anymore. So that root structure really helps with drainage. And compaction is another big thing for us, because we make, I don't know, 10, 15 trips down every row with the tractor in the same wheel ruts and the same tracks every season. And so being able to bust into those layers with something like daikon or turnips, which are some of my favorites, really helps out addressing that compaction without having to use steel, aka tillage, which I don't like.
I actually have a lot of the similar things to Felix, and yet we're in a totally different region. Water infiltration, increase in organic matter, and also plants that build nitrogen rather than take it away. So to build on that a little bit, water infiltration, we've had some really wet years as well, the last quite a few. And when we have a wet fall, the heavy combines on damp soils, it would just we have a lot of compaction issues. So we were growing daikon radish to try to break up that compaction, and it was amazing how that big root, you get down about 2 inches where it was really compacted, and that root would just be triangular and breaking up the soil, and it would get round again once it got past that compaction layer. But I'm looking forward to this spring to seeing how much the infiltration improves, and just general increase in organic matter, and also then growing a crimson clover that will build nitrogen, feed that radish and build nitrogen rather than deplete it. Like, we've grown a lot of grasses and whatnot on the farm, and they're always such a big suck for nitrogen, whereas clovers and alfalfa is good in our rotation to build rather than deplete it.
Yeah, I think cover cropping in general, like the goals seem to be quite similar. For us in vegetables with annual kind of growing, our biggest thing with cover cropping is to avoid soil erosion and build up organic matter. When we don't have a crop in the soil on our high sand and quite a desertish summer, we get quite a bit of sandblasting, and we've lost carrot crops if we don't put like some sort of taller crop beside it, because we'll just get a light breeze in the summer and it'll just literally sandblast off the tops. And so once we started noticing that, it was like really important that we've always got our beds covered, because we are putting a lot of compost and a lot of nutrition into the soil. And we just don't want it floating away off to some other location, even though it probably just goes in the forest nearby. But we want to keep our soil intact. And so keeping that coverage, even if it's just a rye or it's a more complex blend, is really important. And then the organic matter, like we're noticing so much more water holding capacity, and it's not even just from the top above ground growth being incorporated back into the soil, but also the roots. Like rye has a very extensive root system. They can kind of scavenge for nutrients, but they're also quite succulent, and it produces a lot of organic matter below the soil surface, so that when we are ready to kind of incorporate that using a power harrow or minimal tillage, we've got both the organic matter right at the surface, and we got some organic matter kind of getting into the different layers. For us with the sand, we don't have a terrible time with compaction. We're not using tractors on quite a large scale. And so we use tillage radish in a couple locations, especially for some of our newer lease sites that we couldn't get the tractor into. They've got a little bit higher silt level, and so we're using the tillage radish to kind of break up previous compaction layers on farms that had more tractor use. For nitrogen purposes, we're really experimenting with like, what can we do with being an annual system? We can't do a lot of like long-term ones like alfalfas, even some of the clovers. We're not getting enough biomass in a probably a 6 to 8 week period where we're growing a cover crop to get a lot of nitrogen. But we started experimenting with fava beans, and it seems like that is a really great spring crop for us that grows really quick and produces a lot of biomass that's really high in nitrogen. And when we incorporate that back, since we're not harvesting any of the beans or the legumes, we're essentially keeping all that nitrogen in the system for the next crop, for the next vegetables to go in behind it. And that's really the big parts for us in cover cropping: keeping the soil covered, improving our organic matter, and then adjusting some soil properties when necessary.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks everyone. And yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of similarities across the board there in why we choose to cover crop, right? The next question that I have for you, I'm hoping actually will bring up some differences, because I'm thinking with geography and sector, it just might. So the next question is, how do you incorporate cover crops into your crop plan? So looking at the full season from planting to termination. And I know you're all in much different areas across BC, and then you're also in different sectors. So yeah, so it'll be interesting to hear what that looks like for you three. So I'll repeat it again, is how do you incorporate cover crops into your crop plan, looking at the full season from planting to termination?
As I mentioned earlier, my focus is really on the off-season covers, where we don't spend a lot of time driving over the fields, and they can just grow. They can mop up any residual nutrients, store it, and then grow as much biomass as possible above and below ground, that we can then mulch down or roll down, graze off, whatever we choose to do in spring. And so winter blends that are seeded right before our harvest. So usually sometime in September, go through mulch, and then drill the seed right into that. And then spring rains, depending on where you are. In the Okanagan, I used overheads as soon as my fruit changed color, just so I could get the seed growing up until spring or fall rainfall showed up. I think on the island, well, I don't have overheads. I don't need them because it starts raining and then doesn't stop for a few months. And starting to grow throughout harvest. And then as soon as harvest is done, there's no more traffic in the vineyard, really, as far as machine goes. And the cover crops can grow up until bud break, usually maybe just past bud break, so into May. And that's a really long time to have a cover growing. And really, if you can graze it off then extend that by a couple weeks and get some probably sheep or even cattle, depending on where you are, get them fed a little bit. Yeah, started experimenting and thinking about undervine cover crops, which is a challenging and interesting thing to work with, just because it's not quite as easy to manage as in between the rows, exactly under the vine. We need to, I personally like to disturb it a little bit more because I don't want it to be grassed in. Grasses are, especially in the perennial grasses, in my experience, are one of the few things that actually really competes with vines and can devigorate and year blocks. And they like to live under the vine because it's harder to cultivate when you only have 3 feet in between plants. So that is on the docket for this year, to experiment building a seeder that purposefully works under the vine and getting some lower growing stuff in there, probably also mainly over winter, just because I don't have to focus on the vines then.
We've actually taken the approach of a full season cover crop because our season is so short. We're still under snow, and we will be till middle of April, and it starts freezing for us in September. It's hard to get anything growing then. So we've chosen to replace the old style summer fallow that they used to do on the prairies. We've chosen to incorporate some cover crops when the old timers would have summer fallowed, and so and try to take a year, build up the ground. And so, yeah, we've chosen a full season, maybe seeding it later after our other seeding is done. So in June or July, seed something, and then terminate it in October, or let it over winter. But snow comes middle of October, or by November 1st, it's frozen. So I saw someone had a question there whether we incorporate livestock, and we probably should, but we're not livestock producers, and I am trying to a lot of us are grain farmers. When you look at the prairies, the thousands of acres across the prairies that don't have fences, and I'm like one of those guys. I don't have fences, so there probably is a fit, but we're actually just trying to do it with plants. We're trying to make plants do the work for us. Livestock would love it. I had deer out in the field there at Christmas time. I must have had 200 acres, 200 deer on my cover crop field. And it was only a short period of time. It was kind of interesting. You watched them, they were out there for about a month or two, and then they naturally left and went off to other fields after that. So it's interesting anyway.
Yeah, with us with the vegetable side, we're quite intensive with our cover cropping and cropping schedules in general. Majority of our fields, we're getting 2 to 3 crops out of almost every spot over the course of the season. We're very tight, very intensive. We only have 2 or 3 big fields that we're dealing with more of an annual system where you plant once and you kind of wait out the season kind of thing, like corn, watermelons, squash, those longer term crops. But the majority of our crops, with like the lettuce and the carrots and the quicker season crops, we're doing really tight rotation. So we try and incorporate the cover crops whenever we possibly can. And with vegetables, we've got quite a succession. And so we're trying to always keep produce on the market shelf as consistent as possible. And so in the early season, we've got a whole bunch of beds that are kind of sitting open and empty because we can't plant all of those beds with, say, broccoli right off the bat. We need to do broccoli once every 2 weeks throughout the season. And so we've got these kind of couple of beds. It's about 5 to 10% of our intensive bed production that we can actually incorporate a spring cover crop into. And again, we're only growing it for 6-8 weeks, pretty tender. Most of the time our rye doesn't even get to like a seed head stage by the time we have to incorporate it. We're just mowing that and then using our power harrow to incorporate it with the BCS tractor. So again, minimal disturbance, trying to keep that organic matter close to surface and not disturb those roots in there too much. And then when it comes to the fall, we got the same thing happening. It's like crops are coming out of the field, but there's not enough time to plant a new crop because it's going to frost or whatnot. And so that's where we're looking for kind of those quicker growing crops. We did an amazing crop of buckwheat last year. It brought in a ton of beneficials right at the end of the season too, to help clean up some aphids that probably would overwinter, or brought in wasps that would clean up the aphids over winter. It was fantastic. We also had beautiful October weather, which we typically wouldn't see flowering buckwheat get to October 22nd because of frost. But it was a really unique one, and I'm really excited to see once the snow finally leaves what the residue is like on there, because it was a oat and buckwheat mix, and so it should both have winter killed, and then we'll have these kind of 20 beds that we had blocked out from a previous garlic experiment. We'll be able to plant right into them. Hopefully we won't even have to disturb the soil very much. And so we're trying our best in those 2 peak seasons. During the mid-season, like during the heart of the summer, there's barely a bed space open for cover crops. And we're looking at how do we incorporate into our larger fields cover crops more for our row spaces. The problem with that, with our system, we've got some plastic culture fields where we're using plastic mulch, is that rye and grasses become really difficult to pull up that mulch at the end of the season. And they can actually really compete if we don't keep up with the mowing. And so they'll grow really tall and shade out things. But like I said, with the carrots, we're like trying to make sure that if there is not a crop that's tall enough beside it, we're having some sort of rye or something to create a little bit of a mini windbreak just to keep them from sandblasting, especially at that germination stage. With our termination, for the most part, we're either winter killing, just using natural snow and frost, or we're doing a mow and incorporation. We don't do a lot of like traditional tillage with cover crops. Like I said, we're trying to keep that organic matter really close to soil surface and just minimally disturbing it. I saw that question too about the livestock. So we do have sheep, goats, and cattle on our property. We used to allow the goats and animals into the fields in the fall to kind of clean up our crops for us and deposit manure and whatnot. But with food safety regulations and some changes with the organic certification, we can't be having raw manure applied to some parts of our fields at certain points of the year. And then also trying to keep a cow that really wants to get in the strawberry patch out of that is really difficult in the fall. And so we're getting to the point where we're removing that residue and we're handing that more to our livestock. But as our farm is continuing to expand, we're looking at how can we do some more rotational grazing with cover crops in some pasture areas that will be future fields essentially for the vegetable production. So we're doing some bale grazing, growing out some alfalfa and rye cover cropping to kind of create a pasture mix that will keep our livestock going through for maybe 1 or 2, 3 years until that land is ready to be fenced and put into vegetable production. And I think that's really going to help us. And that really helped us, to be honest, when I started this, was my grandparents had livestock on the farm for 30 years. And so our soil was already built up to a certain extent through just like a pasture kind of grass, kind of similar thing that we're trying to create with the cover crop. But we're being more selective with what we're actually putting in there. Alfalfas, more legumes, those longer term things that can really get deeper into the soil. I really want to see what like a rye that we seed in the fall that all the way through to head, how much more root biomass we can get into the soil. And then the nice thing is you just put the cows into that and they eat everything down and they deposit their manure. And then the next round of cover cropping can either go in or comes up. And so this year we planted out some oats, vetch, rye, and pea into a pasture to do a kind of experiment. And so the plan was that the oats and the pea would sprout in the fall, winter kill, and that rye and the vetch this spring should take off. And then we'll put our livestock through that. So it's not necessarily directly into our vegetable system, but it's for future growth on our farm and incorporating kind of a pasture cover crop mix so that that soil is ready to go when we need it.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for fielding some of the questions in the chat, just like as we go. we have been taking note of your questions, just to let you know, and we will circle back to them if they get missed. But yeah, if something comes up and you feel like it's relevant to just speak to it as we're going, definitely feel free. That's great. So yeah, so the next question that I have for you three is, how have cover crops helped with resiliency during extreme weather?
I've only been really doing it for 2 years, so it's hard to tell a massive impact off of it all. I definitely noticed higher soil moisture in the drive rows throughout or longer into summer, into the more arid months, and better drainage. So all of that contributing to better trafficability in the vineyard. And really that mulch layer, that my preferred way of terminating is rolling or mowing really high. Like I'll run a flail mower at, I don't know, try to get it at 8 inches, 10 inches to leave a residual that can then regrow, but also have enough of a protective mulch layer on top. And that stuff, it stays damp for a really long time. And especially through in 2021 under the heat dome, I ran out into the vineyard and stuck a thermometer in the ground in the mulched areas that had a cover crop growing that was a thick layer, and the soil was so much cooler than in, say, the headland areas where everything is driven to death and really flat because I hadn't seeded them. So soil temperature, I think, and the reactions, like I had no issues on any of the acreage that I farmed, almost 50 acres during the heat dome. With regular, we didn't change our irrigation program or anything, and we didn't see any wilting, neither in the plants and the vines nor in the cover that was growing. It was pretty impressive to see because it did get up to 48 degrees, I think, which still blows my mind to this day how hot it actually got. But longer term, I mean, better soil structure and a protective layer, armor, as it's often referred to in regen ag circles. I can't wait to try and do it in one spot for 5 years and see what happens.
Yes, I think we have seen resiliency in cover crops, and I guess it's maybe even just going back 10 years when we were growing hay crops. When we would take out a hay crop to grow grain, we would see a better crop for 5 years. It was just the more organic matter and more of them deep rooted plants that we were usually using tillage. Back in those days, we were using a moldboard plow and plowing them under, and then basically reaping the benefits of all that organic matter. We're still trying to do that, but more zero-till avenues. And this was our first year for growing a radish, and it is really promising. Like the water infiltration should be drastically improved. In our area, when I get 3 inches of rain in a 2 or 3 day period, I know I'm kind of in trouble. Our plants start to drown, and that's just the heavy clay that we have. Other areas, even in our region, the guys down in the river, they love it. They can handle all that moisture in their sandy soil, and yet where I'm at, I can't. So you kind of got to play it to your region too. Like even on our farm, we have a couple different soil types on our farm, and so you kind of gotta play these cover crops to the proper soil types. But I think we would see a drastic 10% increase in yields if with a big rain event. We would be losing yield where we didn't have covers.
Yeah, with that last heat dome that we had, what was it, 2 years ago, we got fried too. That was pretty amazing. Like we're 300 feet above the river. We're on this big southern facing bench, and we just cooked. And what we found was that when we're getting that hot with our sandy soil, we're actually kind of getting hydrophobic. And so when we do get a rain after a large dry period, our soils do not take in water. It all pools. And because it's light and sandy, we're moving a lot of material, even just out of the beds. We have minimal raised bed systems. And even out of there, we'll notice that the water is just moving off. Mike, it'll move all of the sand and the surface debris back into the walkways. And when we're seeing our benefits of our cover crop, we're creating more of that organic matter structure on the soil surface. And so that sand can't move necessarily as readily, but also creates those more natural channels for the water to penetrate down in the soil and doesn't create a crusty layer for us. It's been very hard to actually like measure the benefits of like having cover crops in our vegetable systems, because we've got such a diverse range of crops, and we're not weighing each bok choy to see the difference. As bok choy is one single head, it's a unit. Usually the cover crops aren't impacting how many bok choys, whereas like in grains and such, you can you've got more of a larger scale yield kind of threshold and balancing act where you can kind of measure that. For us, it's kind of just visually seeing how things are working in these type of events. And so we didn't have a lot of cover cropping involved during that, but the fields that had the most tillage and the most use out of it definitely suffered the most during those high heat, because the soil just would not take on water. And so even if we're irrigating, sometimes it can be difficult, but the more organic matter that we seem to be adding to our beds, the better that water holding capacity is. And so that's kind of both ways, right? Like the more organic matter we can have, the more water we can hold during the heat events. But also if there is a rain event after a heat event, we can actually take in and hold on to some of the more moisture. And then, yeah, I think that's going to be a big aspect for us going forward. It's just keeping down that soil erosion on such a sandy, light soil.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for all of that great information. I'm seeing a lot of really great questions coming into the chat, so thank you everyone, and please continue to keep them coming. We're keeping track of them all. Just looking at time, and we're really great for time, but with all of the awesome questions that are coming into the chat, I would like to make sure we address a bunch of them. So I think I'm just gonna ask one more sort of predetermined question that we had. I'll choose one to ask, and then we can get right into some of the questions that people have been asking. So I'm hoping that maybe the three of you can just address some of the challenges that you've had with implementing cover crops, whether it's like specific to your region or your sector, or just in general.
I think regionally specific, I mean, in the Okanagan, having an arid summer and then a freezing winter and ever increasingly cold over the last few years into temperatures that hadn't been seen in a long time, and not having enough moisture throughout the summer to really keep anything growing if you don't irrigate it. That was one of the big challenges, trying to find varieties that species, cover crop species that work within that context. Same with just getting germination early enough in fall to get something growing before winter, so the mice and other rodents don't just clean out your seed. I definitely, whenever I go look at irrigation boxes, they'd just be chock full of any kinds of seed, usually the nice little nutritious ones. The expensive clovers and whatnot you put in the ground are their preferences. I ran into some trouble inoculating with vermicast, where I basically composted an entire bag of seed. And with bag, I mean like a grain bag, so 1,000 pounds of seed or 1,500 pounds of seed over the weekend. That was interesting. Learned my lesson there to not put as much in as I thought. really good vermicompost there that I used as an inoculant because it got to work very quickly. And then just finding termination dates with rye, especially if you try to crimp it over when you're using a crimper. If you go too soon, it'll pop right back up. And certain things like chicory, if you try and crimp it, it's just going to stand right up as soon as you're in the next row. So really finding the right way of terminating and finding a mix of species where maybe something will, like, especially if you're seeding in spring, having a cool season, then going into a warm season and finding the right mix to have stuff survive through the arid summer. Chicory is one of my favorites there because it just keeps growing and then flowers beautifully and self-propagates. So that's fantastic.
I think one challenge for us is picking the right seeds to match our heat units. Up in the north, we are kind of cool. So, you know, you can look at this blend that's got all these different species in it, and you kind of just maybe got to pick out the ones that are gonna grow in your region. Because for us to grow in a warm season plant really isn't gonna benefit us too much. And having the right moisture, we ran into that this year. Like, we were a really wet spring, waited till the ground was fit to plant some cover crops, and then we had no rain for a month to germinate that seed. And so some of it I seeded a little too shallow, and that was actually a mistake. I mean, you don't know till it's kind of too late, but those are a few of the challenges.
I'd say my biggest challenge is trying to offset the cost of growing a crop versus growing a cover crop, because we're doing the cover cropping directly where we're producing the vegetables in the annual system. And so where is the economic threshold, and where is it more beneficial to put a cover crop in versus put another radish crop in for bunching? And that's been our hardest kind of workaround, because it's really hard to measure the benefits of the cover cropping at this point. We also have issues with wild turkeys. I don't know if anyone else has had a cover crop and then you just get a flock of 40 turkeys in there and they'll clean you out pretty quick. I've seeded rye cover crops every 3 or 4 days and they just pick them out, and some come up, but typically if like April 1st is coming up, so I think it's open season, and so they disappear for about 2 weeks, and that's kind of our key window is to get any sort of like grass or grain seed in for us, because they'll just fly over any fence and ravage for us. Yeah, the short season, just finding that sweet spot, because if you seed something a little bit too late in the season, it doesn't get established. You get no benefit in the spring. Same thing in the spring. If it's a really late season, how can we shorten up that cover crop or use something like, say, buckwheat instead of rye, because we only have 3 weeks until the next vegetable crop goes in. And those are kind of the main challenges we'd have.
I think you made a really important point with offsetting the cost for someone like myself who farms in an industry where I work for a winery, so we turn our product into 10x the dollars as far as wine output goes, and it's really a very high value crop. Fruit costs, if you grow grapes, I don't know, your revenue is going to be considerably lower than if you turn it into wine yourself. And I can easily offset $50-$60 worth of seed per acre that goes in once or twice a year, whereas say a market garden where it is, you're scrambling to get as much output as possible, or pasture where you need to graze and you need to make sure you cover all your land and all that kind of stuff, or even grain where prices have not been fantastic over the last many years. It can be a lot harder to justify that and to really rest your land for half a season or a season and move on that. So it's a really important point to make.
And I think that's what's making this like experiment that we're kind of looking forward to, like next fields and taking a couple of years advantage, is really going to benefit us, because we don't have to offset that. not in our production, but the soil will be ready for us in a couple of years. But yeah, it's tough. Like I even in we've got a small berry orchard, and putting cover crops in those walkways. It's not like I'm tilling up underneath the has caps every single time. It's like just offset, and hopefully the benefits will carry over. But yeah, if it's a radish crop versus a cover crop, I don't know, dollar for dollar, it's pretty difficult to kind of fight between the two. So.
Yeah, those are some really good points. Thanks, everyone. All right, we've been keeping track of your questions, so I'm just gonna jump in like sort of the order that they came in. So feel free to continue to throw questions in the chat. They can be to one of our panelists specifically if you're looking for information that you feel is specific to one of them, or it can be just sort of a general question for everyone. If it is specific to someone, maybe just try and name that person so that I can address it to them. So the first question from Grey Ghost Farm, thank you for that, is it sounds like all of the panelists are all growing in monoculture crops in rotation. Have any panelists experimented with soil health management techniques like organic bio introduction and biodiversity of crops? Is anyone soil testing to see impact on trace minerals, etc.? So I think this sounds sort of like a general question. I think feel free to any one of you to pop in and answer that, and I can repeat it if you'd like, or I can put it in the chat if that would help too.
A vineyard is pretty much a monocrop if you just look at the grapes, and that's one of the big challenges of viticulture and of orcharding, that you have those permanent trees, vines, whatever, for 30 plus years, and it doesn't allow for much diversity unless you manage your undervine, under tree area, and your pathways, whatever you want to call it, drive roads, in a diverse way. So I always have, when I seed blends, try to get as diverse as possible, try to represent legumes, grasses, broadleaves, brassicas. Have yet to figure out the quinopod edition because I can't find the seed in an affordable way, but really trying to hit as much diversity in the blend as makes sense while also looking at the dollars, because when you have those, you read about 15, 16, 20, 25 blends, species blends, it gets really expensive really quickly there. And you buy such small amounts that it's not practical. If I only need 10 pounds, but I can only get a 50-pound bag, then I'm paying 5 times as much if I can't sell it to someone else. And soil testing, I do routinely test every few years, but I do a lot of tissue testing to see influences there and work with foliar fertilizers on vines rather than soil applied stuff. And I don't think, other than organic matter, texture, and maybe pH, although pH is super variable too. They're like soil tests. It takes such a long time to move the needle on a lot of stuff that if you spend the money every year to test and see, and you're likely just going to be disappointed, unfortunately, because it takes so long to move around. So I'll get samples every 3 years just so I have something for the books and see movement there, and hope for the best. But if not, then I trust my eyes more than lab numbers. And when I go out and dig holes, and see, look at, smell, touch, taste the soil, it tells me a lot more than just a soil test.
Yeah, our cash crops are mostly monocultures. We do our alfalfas under a canola to get it established, but it's not really combining them. The alfalfa it did grow amazing though. That is a practice that I've been doing, and that alfalfa would get up 3 feet, 4 feet high, right up with the canola, and how much it was feeding the canola, I'm not sure. And so we've just been targeting like a multiple culture cover crop species together when we do our cover crops. So we did a bunch of blends last year to see what would be best in our fields, but and soil testing, we do soil testing. It's I haven't seen the needle move yet either, and I think sometimes that organic matter doesn't show up on a traditional soil test anyways. We need to move to maybe some other kind of testing to really know, but we're gonna just keep working on it.
Yeah, I would say depends on what scale you want to talk about monoculture. Like we're very diverse. We've got over 70 different crops that we're growing at peak season. And so we're always doing rotations. But like if you look at it on a bed scale, like an 80-foot bed or whatnot, it would be a radish bed and then cycled out to a carrot bed or a lettuce bed afterwards. And so we do have them kind of blocked for pest management and whatnot. But like soil health has always been really important, especially with being organic. The soil is what feeds our plants, and it's more important to like look at the soil as more than just a growing media. And so we do annual soil testing. We do our best to kind of rotate those crops for beneficial purposes. Like we'll put a really high nitrogen crop before a lower nitrogen crop, just to make sure that the soil isn't being too impacted. And sometimes it also has to do with like the structure that's left over. And so like if you want to do carrots really early, you've got a really nice loose soil, and then we'll put a fall broccoli into that. We'll give it some extra compost and whatnot. But I think like being as diverse as we possibly can, even with our cover crops, has been really beneficial. Like rye is our main point because it's pretty bulletproof. It's can germinate for us in relatively dry weather or wet weather, and it can handle the winters like a perennial rye. But we're also incorporating fava beans, clovers, buckwheats, oats, rye, vetch. What else did we do? We tried a little bit of sorghum Sudan last year as well. And we're just trying to experiment on like, where is that price point manageable, and then how does that residue incorporate well? Being organic as well, sourcing seed has been a kind of a challenge. We're so limited on like different cover crops that are more readily available to other producers to use, that we can be kind of restricted by a certification requirement. So yeah, we try our best to be as diverse as we possibly can. And like I'm always doing soil tests, always looking at organic matter and nutrition contents, but it is a really hard one to like directly measure in the short term. I think over the long term, if I start looking at our soil tests over 5 or 10 year periods, I think we're really going to start seeing that change and that shift. But it's really hard looking year after year directly at the cover crop. So.
Awesome. Thanks. And actually, Matt, you kind of brought up something that's going to lead us into our next question, is from Lisa, which is just around like where you purchase your daikon or tillage radish cover crop seed. And then she followed up with Canadian suppliers or organic. So just, I mean, the question is specific for daikon or tillage radish, but perhaps if you also, if any of you want to answer to just in general where you get your cover crop seed, that would be awesome too.
We've gotten cover crop seed from TerraLink out of the coast there. When like for organic purposes, sometimes if you can't find something certified organic, you have to find something that's untreated as like an alternative. But William Dam seed in Ontario has been great for us. Spear Seeds in Ontario has also been really great, building some custom organic blends. And Osborne Select Seeds out of Washington. We import a bunch of vegetable seeds, and cover crop seeds come out well there. And we're also pretty lucky that we've got 2 kind of local farmer kind of style stores that bring in different seeds from different companies. So we always have cover crops on hand. We're quite a far ways away from the coast and whatnot to have like a grower supply or whatnot nearby. And so we've got little shops there that we can pick up some extra clover or extra tillage radish if we need. Being super specific on the tillage radish, Again, it all depends on the season, who's got what available. Yeah, those are my companies I like to deal with.
I've gone down many avenues. I think in the past couple years, Silo Grow and Salmon Arm, they're the retailer for North Star Seed, have been really great to work with, great pricing, local to where I was. I could just go and pick it up myself. And they would always have weird species that I was looking for that I couldn't find anywhere else. Try to keep it in the province as much as I can. I've bought stuff from Terralink before, Richardson Seed, and then Grower Supply, because Kelowna had a grower supply, so it was convenient to go out there. But we've also, I worked with a couple of other viticulturists, and we would order as a group just to share some of the more expensive stuff that we didn't need a lot of, and to buy in volume, which often cut down on shipping because we could split it and cut down on price. We managed to get some stuff grower direct. So we had connections to farmers out in Saskatchewan for chickpeas and for stuff like winter lentils that are not necessarily common cover crops, but that we had an application for, and that was really neat to support farmers directly, cut out the middleman, obviously, and keep seed as clean as possible. One of the guys is certified organic too, Gene Covert down in Oliver. And so we would always look for at least untreated. And I feel like it's becoming easier and easier to get untreated seed from suppliers, because people just don't want the little like Christmas ornament colored corn anymore. At least not, or it doesn't even have to be corn. It can be some of the legumes too that have a fungicide coating. And that really counterproductive to what I do, and I don't want to handle it or even put it in my ground. Some of the more exotic stuff, I know that it's tempting to buy it from more garden seed focused people, but it gets really expensive really quickly because they sell it by the pound or by the ounce. We did import some stuff from Green Cover in the US. I use one of their tool. They have a tool called Smart Mix on their website that you can access for free, where they have you input basically you have to find a US zip code that corresponds to your climate, and then all your goals and what you want to do, what crops you're growing, irrigated, non-irrigated, all that stuff. And then it helps you build a blend and gives you the ratios for the blend. And then you can buy the seed off of them if you want to import it. It's fairly easy to do, but they also don't mind if you just, they're very generous with their information and sharing it with others. That's something I've generally noticed in our community and across seed suppliers too. Like if you find a good supplier, they're willing to help you out, like the guys at Spear or Silo Grow. They really want to get you the stuff that you're looking for, and they'll go out of their way to get it.
Yeah, we have similar. North Star is another one that we've used or is to our area. I've also got stuff out of Imperial Seeds out of Manitoba. They have a really good selection of blends and pre-made, pre-packaged stuff. And then Foster's is in the Peace Country, Foster's and Forest Seeds. So it is kind of nice to support your local retailers, and some of the stuff they're importing, some stuff is maybe grown locally. So you kind of got to weigh that. We would like to play with growing some of our own seed, why not give it a try on something that's gonna make your own, build your own.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Les. And if you decide to do that, let me know. I'd love to know how it goes. Maybe if you wanna, like, I know we just went over a lot of different names there. So if anyone wants to punch some of those names into the chat so that people can write them down in case we miss any, or what I could also do is I'm going to be sending a follow-up email to all of the participants after, just with like some more general information, obviously the link to this recording, like a survey, things like that. So I could even just go back and list them myself in the email if that would be helpful. And then when I send that out, you'll have like the full list of every one that was just said, because I know that quite a few were brought up there. So yeah, I can do that. The next question is from Kristen, who I think actually had to jump off the call, but it's a good question, and I know it'll be included in the recording. So we're gonna ask it. Are there any things that you look for to give you confidence in cover crop seed quality?
I can have a good conversation with the rep, the salesperson, and they're not just trying to sell me something, but they're willing to answer questions, then that's usually a way for me to choose. And then obviously, I mean, you won't know until you open the bag. And I've had surprises when I open the bags, and then I just make a note and don't order that again. Or if it's terrible, I'll make a comment. Thankfully, I've never had that. But so far, I've not really run into duds. So that's quite good. Seeds wanted to grow.
You can also ask for a germ test. That all probably should have been germ tested. So often, like the seed suppliers are all shooting for a high percentage of I was talking to one of my local guys, and even me trying to grow something, he's like, well, it's gonna have to grow, it has to be quality or they don't want it. So and yeah, cleanliness, the seed cleaning is a big part of it. Most of that seed or all that seed will get cleaned in a plant, and that job is you're relying on them. When you open the bag, you kind of know, but that's part of their due diligence.
Yeah, I would agree there. Customer service and their willingness to be open with you and help you out goes a long way. For us, another big one is like what will eat it. So mice getting into a bag is a relatively decent sign, because they're obviously going after something that's in there. Same with the turkeys. I've never really had a problem with germination. If anything, we don't get a very good germination stand, it's on us or something ate it, like turkeys or something flew in. And so in our experience, everything has so far been great. Didn't matter which supplier we got it from.
That's good to know. Thanks. This next question is from Dieter, asking, what type of information would you like to have to be even more successful with cover cropping?
That's a tricky one. What do I want? I don't know what I don't. I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what I want that I don't know. I think just more conversation, visiting people, like walking their land, talking to them, and everyone I've met so far who's really interested in using cover crops, be that at trade shows, conventions, whatever it is, or even just farm visits, people who come by. It's really those conversations and sharing experiences and good or bad knowledge, stories. That's really the pinnacle for me. And if someone takes me out on their land and brings a shovel to dig a hole to see what's going on, that's where it's really at, because you can actually see what's happening, especially if you know what you're looking for, or even if not. I was fortunate enough over the last year to work very closely with Nicole Masters in her Create program, and we went to a ranch in Nevada that had hydrophobic soils that were overgrazed, flood irrigated for the longest time. They put a pivot on it and started growing a cover. And we got there in year 2 of the only thing they did was grow covers and feed it humic and fish through the pivot, which is a whole different story. And for the first time, the kind of patriarch of the family dug a hole with us and saw that the hydrophobic layer had disappeared, and that his crop actually, the triticale, grew roots that were beyond an inch or two, which is what the grass had before. And just watching him react to that, I need more of that. Just seeing how their life changes when they have success in it, and when they embrace the kind of being vulnerable and admitting that they need help, and then they ask for it, and someone comes and helps them out, and be that in a coaching consulting relationship, or even just advice as a neighbor, as a friend, as a colleague. It goes so far, and that first step of asking for it is the hardest, and then you're off to the races. And most people who start don't stop. They find something else and find something else, and just keep going down rabbit holes galore.
I don't know if I'll answer the question right, but I mean, to see improvements in the soil, like for us, we see our tire tracks on wet years. I'm looking, you see, if you make ruts in our field, you'll see those ruts for 3 years. You can fill them in, and you'll see them for a long time. Stuff just doesn't grow properly there. And for us to see improvements in our soil is huge, right? And I think we will see it if we can infiltrate that water and it goes away. More people will be sold on the principle of it. And I already got neighbors. We did a big trial last year, and on a whole bunch of different covers. And now I got a few other grain farmer neighbors that are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a quarter next year too, and try this. So I think when people, and we're tackling probably our worst land to start with. So if we can improve that, that's what will make it catch on.
Yeah, I must agree. This is a tricky question, but I think like connecting with other growers is really important. Being a pretty young grower myself, been at this 10 years, I'm not even 30 yet. I'm realizing how few opportunities we do have farming. If you put 100 farmers in a room and you talk about last year, you've just gained 100 years of agricultural knowledge from people passing little things back and forth, versus having to go through 100 years yourself, and just learning how to incorporate cover crops better into your systems. I think if it's like a very strict and to the point question, would be that financial offset cost for vegetable producers. And I know there's some charts and you can do some math and whatnot on it, but each farm is so unique with their climate, with their soil, what crops they're growing. It's very difficult to actually like measure it. And I don't quite know. It's a kind of a new frontier. If growers, if they saw a really financially beneficial offset to instead of growing a crop that year, maybe more people would be growing cover crops for the right reasons. So maybe looking more into that.
Yeah, thanks. Those are some really good points. We love farmer to farmer learning. That's why we're all here at this event. So there was actually a follow-up question from Jessica. Just wondering if anyone's used union forage, and maybe if you have, like, I'm assuming that Jessica, you probably want to know their experience using it. So yeah, just a follow-up question to the seed conversation. Has anyone used union forage?
No, I haven't. I've talked to them I think I know the company. I've talked to them at some trade shows and stuff, and just haven't used them. I think they do got some really good stuff. And if you are connected with them, I would say use them. Like I don't know anything, no negative issues about them. I think they would be good. And if they've got the salespeople, or not even salespeople, the people in place to help you get off the ground, that's the key, is having those right conversations.
Awesome. Thanks, Les. And sorry, Matt. Yeah.
I'm not familiar. I was just saying I'm not familiar with the company. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can see actually that Natasha, thanks for your input in the chat there, that you've used Union Forage and that it helped you diversify the covers that you could find locally. So that's great. And if anyone else on the call who's used Union Forage, definitely feel free to pop in and share your experience. There's a question here from Jordan. It's a little long, so bear with me. I'm gonna go through it all because I think there's some context here. So Jordan is a tree farmer. The first question is thoughts on cover cropping a block of land after harvesting trees in spring, maybe for the rest of that year. Would it add substantial nutrients, nitrogen fixing, etc., back into the soil in such a short time frame to boost the trees planting in the same area the next spring or even that same fall? We would be sowing large amounts of cover crop out on large areas while the land rests. So if there's any advice there for a tree farmer.
It sounds like well, maybe I'm just interpreting it that way, but it sounds like covering a fallow with a cover crop. So something that Les addressed earlier. I mean, if you're not doing anything else with the land and you can afford it, then I think it's a smart thing to do. Just how many nutrients you put back in, that's a different story. It'll depend on your blend and what you do and how you manage it, how much it grows. But if otherwise it just sits around like a ripped up piece of land after pulling out trees. I don't know if it's a nursery context or if it's more of a woodlot context or what it is, harvesting trees. Yeah, if you can do it, then might as well do it.
Yeah, and I would maybe add too, I mean, it probably would help with erosion. I mean, it's and growing a grass or, I mean, I don't know, it's whatever grows good in your area. On the prairie sometimes, or in the east, they'll grow oats. You know, oats is a easy one to propagate and it's cheap seed and it would help with erosion. Breaking down those roots, I think it would be a longer term. If it was just harvested now, those roots would be pretty solid still. You're not gonna a clover and whatnot would help with build some nitrogen, maybe possibly, but you're probably not going to really see the effects one summer, but wouldn't hurt to grow something out there.
yeah, I think knowing what type of tree, like if we're dealing tree fruits or Christmas trees or nursery production, would help kind of steer that. But yeah, it'll come down to like what type of cover crops you're looking to get. So if you have enough time and you're looking into like wanting to put nitrogen in the soil, because nitrogens and legumes are going to be fixing your nitrogen. And so if you could put something like fava bean, for example, somewhere 150 to 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre, that's without you harvesting any of the beans or the seed, because that's where a lot of the proteins and the nitrogen actually gets stored. And so incorporating that can help boost depending on your crop needs, right? Taking your soil sample and knowing what your nitrogen content's already in the soil. And if you can add 150 pounds of N in a season, like that is pretty good for most vegetable crops. Again, I don't know if it's a perennial type tree thing, it might only be enough to give you a boost for 1 or 2 seasons, and then you'll have to go more back into a typical like fertilizing program. If you're looking into more of the cereals, they're great for erosion, and they're the ones that are going to scavenge any nutrients. And so in that year of fallow, if you're receiving heavy rainfall or wind events, you're not going to be losing that soil and losing that nutrition to leaching or flying away in the wind. So I think it would be beneficial. It'd just be really hard to like quantify like how much nutrition would be beneficial. It's just really nitrogen, and then tying up any other nutrients that are already in your soil from leaving your soil system.
Yeah, great. Thanks. I hope that answered your question. Jordan. And actually, Jordan had a follow-up question, which I think I'll ask as our last question, because I think it might be a good way to end the session. It's around resources, which I think is a great place to leave everybody with. So, so the question is there a good reference list of cover crop types and their benefits listed somewhere, maybe online? Jordan says, new to this and have no idea what makes a good cover crop for specific needs. And I know, Felix, I think you spoke to this earlier, just there's an online tool. But yeah, if there's any other sort of resources that you all use to help plan for what cover crops you're going to use, yeah, feel free to share. It'd be great. And I can write them down, or we can put them in the chat, and I'll make sure I have a good list here.
For BC specific, I think the province, the webpage is still a landing page. They're working on publishing a database for BC specific. I know for viticulture, there's been a lot of research going on. Carnell actually is one of the participants in the study, and he's had a researcher test different cover crop varieties over a few years now. I'm not sure how many years it is, but there's data coming out there for more perennial systems in the Okanagan context, so more summer arid, low precipitation. I'm really excited for the BC specific guide to come out, because we are unlike anywhere else in the country as far as climate goes, and even our subregions are so diverse. I like using that. The ones that are mentioned in the chat are pretty good resources. I still refer back to the USDA has a cover crop chart. It looks like a periodic table, and it gives you, it's that you can click on the individual species and it takes you to a PowerPoint presentation basically when you download it, and it gives you information on how much water a certain cover crop uses, whether it's a warm season, cool season, what family it falls into, and then a little bit more detail on how it grows. Is it tall, which for someone like myself who deals with perennials that can't get crowded out, or vegetables that can't get crowded out, it makes a difference between 10 inches or 12 inches of growth and 3 feet, depending on the variety of a certain species that you buy. And I like Acres USA and their publications as resources. And then, I mean, there's more and more tools coming out every day. Plus, talk to guys who are already doing it, guys and girls who are already have those 100 years of experience that you can benefit from. And I've yet to meet someone who said, no, I don't want to tell you about it, because it's been mentioned before. It's like every farm is different. And if you copy exactly what I do, it's probably not going to work out for you, because I put a lot of thought into designing it for my context and my system. And so I've always said, like, just give me a call, send me an email, ask me a question, come by. You can see whatever you want in the operation and learn that way. And I'll likely learn something from you in that process. And that's how it all develops.
And I think to add to some of those, I think BC has regional agrologists in every region of the province, and they might be able to point you in the right to the right people. And reaching out to organizations like in the Peace Country here, anyways, we have our BC grain producers. There's a forage seed association, a forage in beef. There's about 3 forage associations, and they're all part of our Peace Country Living Labs. And I believe there's a BC Living Labs in the rest of the province. So those are all working towards kind of the same kind of goal, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. There'll be somebody there anyways.
Yeah, I look to the States a lot for a lot of the research, or Ontario. There's great extension programs out of OMAFRA. The other one that comes to mind is like SARE in the States, the Sustainable Agricultural Research and Education Project. Like if you do a quick Google search, there's like a whole big fact sheet on different cover crops, and it goes through a whole bunch of different sustainable farm practices. But for vegetable context and market gardening, a lot of the seed producers or seed sellers have like info sheets to help you out. And again, you've got to kind of do your research across multiple platforms and pull what works best for you or what's going to work in your system. Even just like reading through Johnny Selected Seeds or West Coast Seeds cover crop grow guides. They're quite different. One's in the States and one's in BC, two totally different sides of the continent, and two different scales. One's more garden focused and one's more commercial vegetable production. So by doing a bunch of different research and looking at different avenues and building out your own plan and then experimenting, like part of the excitement of this is just testing it out. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. And we always look forward to the next season, trying something different because something didn't work out quite as well as we thought, or something worked out way better than we thought, and how we adjust and grow over time. And I think BC's also got the regenerative network coming out too shortly. I think there was an organic chat we were talking about. There's a network and resource thing coming out from the BC government about regenerative agriculture, and how that's going to incorporate in the future, about kind of tying certified organic growers who are focused on soil health and more of not certified organic, but people that are really concerned about their soil health and how they're going to mitigate and improve their soils long term. So I think that's going to be a great connection for the province, because there's no right or wrong way to farm. Everyone does it different and everyone's got a different context. And yeah, it's great to be sharing ideas.
There's also, I don't know if folks are aware, but Farmers for Climate Solutions has an online learning hub. It's called Farm, but one of the resources within it is a self-directed cover cropping program. And it's all free, so you can log in, you can sign up, and then you can review the different units, and it goes over things like fundamentals, how to select cover crops, soil health, how to grow it, and then there's a list of resources there. So something to check out if folks are interested in really digging into online learning.
Yeah, thanks, Julia. And if you happen to have the link up, maybe you could pop it in the chat. Thank you. Awesome. Well, yeah, we're a couple minutes past here, so it's a shame because there's just so much great information being shared. So it's always a shame to have to end these events, but hopefully we'll all get together soon. But I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening. I mean, whether it's online or at an in-person field day, I always appreciate the lively discussions. Felix, Les, and Matt, thank you so much for joining us. You've been incredibly informative. Such a joy to hear from, always. I think that there are so many takeaways from the knowledge shared this evening. And I appreciate everyone who came to the call with things to share, advice and experience. It's really great to all get together in a space to share knowledge and experiences. So thank you to everyone. Just a reminder that you can apply for cost shared funding through the BC Climate Agri-Solutions Fund in cover cropping, nitrogen management, and rotational grazing. Applications are closed for right now, but they will be opening up again in June and September, and you can sign up for their newsletter, and then they'll notify you when applications are open. We also try and let people know, on our social media and on our through our newsletter when those applications are open. So, and Julia is also popping links to those in the chat, so you can visit the website and check those cost shared funding programs out. If you are looking for more information about cover cropping, we do have 3 recorded field days in 3 different regions in BC that we hosted last year, as well as a cover cropping webinar on our website. There's a ton of information there. They are, fairly long watches. They're like a couple hours each because we really wanted to get the extent of the information in there. So they're really great resources, and they're regionally specific. So so head to that link if you want to check those out. We are going to be hosting more farmer field days this year across the province. So please follow us on social media or subscribe to our newsletter to find out the dates of those. We're very much in the planning stages, so we don't have any information to share yet about those, but we know that they'll be happening. So please just make sure you watch out for those dates. And I will be sending out a follow-up email with a survey, the link to the recording, which will be on our website, and then a link to any upcoming events. And I'll also include the list of seed suppliers as well as the list of resources that we went over in this event. So I'll link everything, so it'll be really accessible for everyone. So I'll do my best to get that out ASAP, but yeah, you should see it in the next few days. The survey, please take 5 minutes to fill it out if you can. It's incredibly helpful. It informs like all of our events going forward. We really, really love hearing from farmers about what you all want to learn and what you all want to be coming together to talk about. So filling out that survey, it's really short. We tried to make it as short as possible. So yeah, so just please give us your input because it does inform what we do in the future. And that's it. So thank you so much for coming and enjoy the rest of your course. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.